Evening, and thank you so much for joining us for this presentation on taking great photos with any camera. Whether using an expensive SLR or your cell phone, we will learn tips we can immediately apply to take better pictures. Our instructor will coach us in how to improve our compositions and take advantage of the best light for the subject. Jim Frazier is a retired professional speaker and trainer on tax issues. Currently, Jim is a volunteer photographer at Cantigny, facilitating photography groups, teaching classes, and is an active member of the Elgin Area Camera Club. His photographic work has been seen in many publications and a wide variety of advertising, signage, calendars, presentations, websites, and blogs. His prints hang in collections all over the country. So now, thank you so much for being here, Jim. We really appreciate your time and effort to put this presentation together for us. I know we're going to learn a lot. So I'll turn it over to you and go ahead. We are already seeing your beautiful slide.
Thank you, Barry. And again, thank you all for coming to the program tonight, or at least coming to wherever your computer is and joining in. I'm going to hit the first button. This is just got a whole mess of ways to find me on the internet. Best way to find me is to type in Jim Frazier. It's spelled with a Z-I-E-R, not like Frazier Crane. He spelled it with an S. I spell it with a Z. Type in Jim Frazier Photography in Google or whatever you use, and you'll probably find me that way. The two email addresses, if one doesn't work, try the other one. My presence is on the internet in a variety of places. I have a blog. I use Flickr. I've been using Flickr since 2005. I'm a big fan of Flickr. If you have any questions about Flickr, let me know. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. I don't friend people on Facebook that I don't know, but all the pictures that I put out there are public. And so if you just follow me, then you'll be good to go for Facebook as well. And let's see, the next slide is what our agenda is. First thing I'm going to do is talk about some common mistakes that are made. Common mistakes. And then we'll talk about some of the rules of composition. And notice rules is in quotation marks. And I'll get to why it's in quote marks later. And then we'll talk a little bit about resources that you can take advantage of down the road. Please note, as Barry said, this is for any camera, not just for SLRs, single lens reflex cameras, but any camera, even a smartphone. And in fact, since probably most of you are using a smartphone these days for at least some of your picture taking, again, all of this is going to apply to you no matter what type of camera you're using. So let's kick around those common mistakes. One of the most common mistakes is you thinking that your picture is interesting to somebody else. Just because it's fascinating to you doesn't mean anyone else in the world is the slightest bit interested. It's an important lesson to take, because I see pictures all the time of pictures that people just are so excited about. And when you actually get the picture, it's like, they could have taken a good picture, but in fact, they just took a shot and it's not very interesting, or the subject isn't very interesting. To give you a couple of examples of pictures that I consistently take that nobody else cares about. I collect photographs of bait signs. I've done it for 30-odd years. Started doing it on my honeymoon. We were in Chincoteague Island in Virginia, and I just started taking pictures of bait signs. And eat signs. Yes, there are people, no, there aren't that many people out there, but there are a couple people out there that photograph eat signs. And finally, probably the most boring, cripplingly boring project of all, I photograph post offices. And again, none of these pictures probably interest any of you, but that's the point. They interest me. So just because they interest me doesn't mean any of you cared about the last 3 slides I showed. Facebook has basically done two good things for humanity, and that is eliminate the need for vacation slideshows. Now, some of you who are young may not remember the torture that slideshows were back in the day, but I remember my dad's slideshows, and I used to do slideshows back before the internet. And I'm pretty sure nobody was really excited when I pulled out the projector and said, hey, let's look at some pictures. Similarly, nobody really wants to look at those 200 or 300 prints that you just got back from Walgreens of your vacation. And so Facebook has accomplished those two things, allowing you to put up those 400 pictures on Facebook. And now people can look at them, or they don't have to look at them. They can see that you put up those 400 pictures like that particular item, and then they don't have to look at the rest of the pictures. So Facebook has done that for humanity. Thanks, Facebook. Now let's talk about more specific photographic mistakes that we make. The first one is crooked horizons. This one I hate. I hate this very much, and I would like you all to stop doing it right away, please. It's easy to fix. First of all, it's difficult to do when you're taking pictures because you're usually paying attention to other things and not getting the horizon straight. More and more modern cameras actually have built into the viewfinder some sort of mechanism for you to tell whether or not you've your horizon straight. But it's tough to do, I will grant, because I usually have to fix horizons in my software after the fact, as I did in this case. It's just a matter of recognizing that nothing, in my personal opinion, looks more amateurish than to show a picture where the horizon isn't straight. So please, please, please do that. Now, sometimes they don't have to be straight at all. For example, in this particular case, this is the picnic shelter at Potawatomi Park in St. Charles. I was taking a picture and I looked up at the tower and I thought, there's no horizon, but this also just wouldn't look very interesting if it was just straight up. So I tilted it at an angle, an intentional angle. By the way, that's called a Dutch angle, and it comes from German filmmakers, not people from the Netherlands, but German filmmakers between the world wars that were doing expressionistic type filmmaking, and they did Dutch angles a lot. And so that's where the term comes from. So you don't have to have a straight horizon, but at least if you're going to have a crooked horizon, it should look like you intended to do it. The next common mistake is intruders. What's an intruder? Look at that picture, and now I'm going to ask you a few rhetorical questions. Obviously, you can't answer, but think about them. What's the intruder in this picture? If you guessed that lamppost coming out of the guy's head, and I actually posed him that way specifically for this presentation, that's what we're talking about. So we want to try to avoid intruders. Intruders are just those things that come in from the sides that just get in the way of the picture that you're trying to take. Try to avoid intruders, okay? When you're taking the picture, when you're composing the picture, kind of do a sweep around the head of your subject or do a sweep around the edge of the picture to see if you can spot intruders. To give you an example of this, this is from Cantigny's. About half the pictures you're going to see tonight probably came from Cantigny. I do spend a lot of time there in the course of a year. Probably half of the photographs that I make are from Cantigny. But this is the new rock garden. If you have not been to Cantigny in a while, or you have been there and you've been frustrated by all the areas that are closed, this is one of the areas that has just opened up. They've opened up most of what was under construction for the last year. But this is the new rock garden. And so I wanted to take a photograph of it. But as I was composing it, I noticed, as I pulled my camera up, I said, uh-oh, I got intruders. I got these things here, and I got this over here. And so what I did was I simply moved closer and took the shot, eliminating the intruders. I didn't have to do any post-processing to eliminate the intruders. Now, I did cook this picture a little bit. I warmed it up with, because warm tones are usually nicer tones. In fact, I may have overcooked this depending on your perspective. But in any case, I got rid of the intruders. Except if I look carefully, I've still got one over there that I really don't like, but I don't think anybody's going to worry about that Again, rhetorical question, spot the intruder in this picture. Okay, the intruder is the pencil. Now, if I had spotted this picture when I had taken it, well, that would have solved the problem. It would have been great. I would have been able to basically fix the picture and not have to do any fiddling around in post-processing. But frankly, it was just easier to post-process. Now, you'll also notice I did a little cooking on this as well, brighten up the water and so forth. But since, for me, taking out the mere act of reaching down and taking out the pencil is too much work because I'm going to process the picture anyway. I can remove it then. So I get a little lazy in that regard. So you might want to avoid being as lazy as I am. The next problem is bright spots. Bright areas in a picture tend to draw somebody's eye away from maybe what your subject is. For example, in this picture, also at Cantigny, you'll notice bright spots all over the picture. What happened was I was trying to take this picture from underneath the flower a little bit and shooting up into the understory, the bushes and the trees in the background. And I thought it was clean, but when I looked at it later, there were all these bright spots from the sun peeking through the sky. And so a little post-processing, a little darkening, a little punching up, and we have a much, to me, better picture of a nice yellow flower in a relatively dark background. So watch your bright spots. One more bright spot, and that is here. You can, I hope you can see my bright spot here. Okay, I saw this when I was taking the picture. I saw it immediately after I clicked the button. Didn't see it while I was taking it, but I saw it as soon as I saw it on the little screen in the back of the camera. And I couldn't figure out a way to fix it at the situation. It was just there, nothing I could do about it. So I knew this would be something I'd have to post-process out, which I did. Also cropped in and eliminated another bright spot that was here. And so again, bright spots can be a real problem, and you want to try to avoid them or eliminate them later if you can. Barry, do you have some questions?
Yeah, Jim, I just have a question here. Someone was asking, can you tell us how you removed the pencil in post-processing?
I use Lightroom for most of the vast majority, 95% of my processing. But an awful lot of packages will allow you to do this. It's just basically a matter of putting a little cursor over the item you want to remove, clicking, and it's gone. It's not that hard. In Lightroom, I think it's called the spot removal tool, and you just put the spot over the item and it kind of samples from the surrounding area and kind of makes some assumptions using artificial intelligence, maybe, I'm not sure, but it makes assumptions based on the stuff that's around what the object is that you don't like, and it's gone. So it's not magic. In Ansel Adams' day, it was magic, but nowadays it's not magic. So
okay, great, thank you.
But photo processing software is out there, and if you are looking for something good, I strongly recommend Lightroom. They have a telephone or a smartphone version of Lightroom as well, and it can be very handy for fixing a lot of the problems we're talking about. Blurry photos. Blurry photos happen for pretty much three reasons, at least unintentional blurry photos. First of all, the subject moved, or perhaps you moved, or perhaps the camera. And this is a problem with autofocus cameras, which is just about all cameras these days, is that they focus on the wrong thing. For example, if a subject moves, this is a happy accident. This is Pee-wee, who's our previous cat, and Pee-wee was sitting in front of me on the floor one day, and he never does that because Pee-wee and I just didn't get along. And so, but for some reason I had my camera with me and I decided I'd just take a picture of him. Well, at the moment I took the picture, he turned his head. Happy accident. I think it's kind of a cute photo, but it wasn't my intention. I was just looking for a straightforward picture of Ansel or Pee-wee. And so, but it can happen, and that works out. But more often than not, your subject moves, then you didn't intend for them to move or something like that. So trying to avoid your subject moving is your first objective. It's also possible that you moved, and this is usually because there's not enough light to take the picture. Without getting into too much of the technical stuff, we have to worry about shutter speed. Shutter speed is one of the things that the camera uses to control how much light hits the sensor. And so if the shutter is open for, say, a hundredth of a second, it usually stops most camera shake most of the time. It should have in this situation. I was taking a picture of the produce aisle at Jewel because I was just stunned. This was earlier during the plague when you had a lot of empty shelves in the grocery store, and I was just amazed that there were actually empty bins of kale. I just couldn't believe it. And so took a picture. Well, I know also that in low light situations, I take a bunch of pictures. I just push that button 5 or 6 times. Usually one of the pictures will be sharp. And so that's what the one on the right was one of those pictures that wound up being sharp. If I look closely at this, it's still not real sharp, but it's certainly sharper than this one. So beware of low light situations, usually particularly when you're inside, to make sure that you're holding the camera steady. When you're using a cell phone, try to hold it up against something so that you minimize the shake, the camera shake and the blur that comes from that. Or the camera autofocused on the wrong thing. Now this is Ansel. Ansel is our current generation cat. And I allow him to lay on my lap once in a while in the evening. And when he does, he usually does cute things. And so I take pictures of them with my cell phone. And he was doing a cute thing and I tried to take a picture, but the camera did not focus on the fur of Ansel. The camera will search for, particularly a cell phone camera, will search for something that looks really easy. And the fabric of the chair that I was sitting on was easy. Ansel's fur, not so easy. And so that was a situation where I really wanted to get a picture of Ansel, but I couldn't get the camera to focus on Ansel. Nowadays, you can push the button, you can press the center of the screen, but by the time I thought of doing that, he had already moved and he wasn't being cute anymore. Now let's talk about rules of composition. Notice that's in quotes. And the reason is that these are not absolute rules, but they're pretty close. Think of them as tools to help you take better pictures. The objective of compositional rules, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the program, are things that you can do, tools, and somebody has once used the term vocabulary, but I like the term tools, that will help you create something. Now we're talking about art, folks, and so now we get into all that arty stuff. Remember, first of all, that your objective is to create something that pleases you. And I do that. I'll take a picture and I'll post it on Flickr and Facebook, and it might not get very much interest, but I know that I liked it. And frankly, that's good. If I liked it, that's good enough. But it's very gratifying if you make something that pleases or at least interests somebody else, the viewer. Generally, the rules of composition revolve around getting the viewer to stop and explore your picture, okay? And I'm going to steal the next line. I heard somebody in a composition course say, the objective is to encourage the viewer to want to step over the edge of the bottom part of the picture and enter the picture. Those are what we're looking for. Those are our objectives. Create something that pleases you, hopefully create something that pleases or at least interests somebody else, and encourage the viewer to want to explore it and maybe even step into the picture. And the first rule is probably one that many of you have heard, and it's often denigrated. That's the rule of thirds. It's not the rule of thirds, it's the tool of thirds. For example, this is a red-headed woodpecker at Cantigny, of course. Birders, this is pretty cool. For people who aren't birders, it's like, it's a bird. But as you can, and this was shot with a telephoto lens. The bird was high in the tree. But it's not that terribly interesting. But If you move him, and obviously I also cropped in, to a rule of thirds position, all of a sudden, for a lot of people, that picture becomes more pleasing, okay? Now, the rule of thirds rule is that you should have your subject at one of these 4 spots. Think tic-tac-toe, the intersections. I don't care about that. I think the rule of thirds is about forcing you to think about your picture and think about whether or not there's something better you can do. If the picture cries out for having the subject in the center, that's fine. We all tend to photograph things that we're interested in, and we tend to put them in the center, but those are usually not successful pictures. They're much more interesting is if you can offset the subject a little bit, okay? Sometimes not. I'm going to show you some examples where the rule of thirds doesn't work. It all depends, but the rule of thirds is worthwhile thinking about. And when you start looking at pictures, which you will be doing, with these kinds of ideas in mind, you're going to think, you know, that picture looks pretty good, and it's using the rule of thirds. Yeah, that person is in the rule of thirds position, so it will help. The last line I think is really key, and that is, you want the picture to be more than just a picture of the subject. You want to make it a picture that's more than just a simple picture of a red-headed woodpecker, okay? For example, this is Pee-wee, and Pee-wee was laying on a freshly made bed. In fact, I even cleaned this thing up in Lightroom to eliminate some of the wrinkles and so forth, because I wanted it to look pretty straight. Pee-wee was laying there, and I thought, wow, this is a good picture. So I grabbed my camera, came back, he was still there. And so I took the picture, and I composed it this way. This isn't later cropping, because I knew this is what I wanted. I wanted him over on the side. I wanted him looking at this expanse of emptiness. This is called negative space. And negative space is not just emptiness. Negative space is where it becomes part of the picture. The point of this picture is Pee-wee is looking into that space, okay? And he's a relatively insignificant part of that space because he's put off on the side, but he's looking into that space. The space becomes part of the point of the picture. But you'll notice it probably would not have worked at all if I had put him in the middle. So by putting him off to the side, basically, I've rule of thirds here, then we've got a much more, I think, successful picture. This is the municipal building in downtown St. Charles. It's centered, it's got a nice reflection in the river, but you know, but if we apply the rule of thirds and put it off to the side, what happens? Well, not just that we put it off to the side, but now that gives us room for more of downtown St. Charles, the bridge, the edge of the dam, the reflections of all those things in the river, and happenstance, I waited a little bit of time to take this picture when the sun had gone down a little bit more, giving us warmer light. And we'll talk about warmer light later on. You'll see a couple of train pictures too, because that's another thing I like to take train pictures of. This is probably one of my most viewed pictures on Flickr. And it's very popular. A lot of train folks like it, but notice where the front of the train is. It's in the rule of thirds position. And so that's helps the picture, gives it a whole lot of depth, all right? And that's what we're going for, okay? Another example, this butterfly. If I had centered the picture on the butterfly, it would be a picture of a butterfly. But by moving it off, offsetting it, now it's not only a picture of a butterfly, but it's a picture of the bush, it's a picture of these pink things over here. It becomes possibly more interesting than just a picture of a butterfly. Now, if I was creating an ID manual for butterflies, I'd want to have a much more centered, and I wouldn't really be caring about the picture. But when you're trying to do something a little bit more interesting, You want to think more than just photographing the subject, but photographing and making a picture. Another example of the rule of thirds, this is Fabian Forest Preserve. I used to live in Batavia, now I live in Elgin, so a lot of these pictures will be Kane County based as well. Freshly fallen snow. By the way, if you ever want to take pictures of snow, get out there as soon as you can, because nothing ruins a freshly fallen snow picture more than a bunch of people tramping around in the freshly fallen snow. Anyway, rule of thirds, you have not only a picture of the tree, which in and of itself might or may not have been interesting, but you have a picture now of the forest and the tree in context in that forest. The rule of thirds allows you to think about the picture and maybe make it more than just about the subject you're photographing. Bee picture, everybody wants to photograph bees and flowers. My advice is just find yourself a flower and just sit there and wait and they'll come to you. This one actually happens to be about the most perfect bee picture I've ever taken, because I happened to be a bright day, so I was able to get him nice and sharp. I don't know if it's he or she, but in any case, he's nice and sharp, and the flower is nice and sharp. But again, it's a picture of a bee on a flower. It's not just a picture of a bee. It's a bee in the context of a flower, more than just a picture of a bee. Sometimes it's a matter of taste, all right? For example, took this picture in Waikiki. I was there actually to work. I had 2 days in Hawaii, and I went out the first night, walked along the beach in Waikiki, and took this picture with this just a little point and shoot camera. Now, which picture do you like better? Again, rhetorical question. This one or this one? Now, I used to like this one more, but based on what I hear people talking about why they like this picture, I've decided I like this picture more. But it's a matter of taste. Usually when I present this in front of an audience that I share air with, it's about split. But I think this is a better picture. And people have told me there's a couple of reasons. First of all, the real subject, I think, is not the boat. The subject is the cloud, this cloud bank and the sun behind it. But here I've moved it off to the side, giving a little bit more room because it was crowding the sunset, or it was crowding the sailboat in the first picture. But in this picture, the sailboat's got more room, plus, and there's the added touch of this horizontal surf wave, or whatever you want to call this, at the bottom. And so people have, so I kind of like this one better, but it's just a matter of taste. And sometimes the rule of thirds don't apply. For example, one of my favorite types of pictures to take is symmetry pictures. Symmetry pictures are pictures where you just have everything evened up and square. There's nothing that's about rule of thirds in this picture. Absolutely nothing. Okay. But I just love this kind of picture. I love to go to churches and theaters. This is the Paramount Theater in Aurora. And I set up my tripod smack dab in the center of the middle aisle, all the way as far back as I can. And I level it out, and I do a few things with the tripod, and I take the picture, and I just love that type of picture. Nothing rule of thirds about this at all. Similarly, this is Cantigny's greenhouse in the fall. They raise poinsettias for, I believe, or at least they used to. I don't know what's happening this year, but they raised poinsettias for the Wheaton Rotary Club, I think. And so they have a sale at Christmas time, and so Cantigny raises the poinsettias. By the way, here's an endorsement. My wife and I, once upon a time, got 3 or 4 poinsettias a year from different sources, and the Cantigny poinsettia always lasted the longest. Just a tip if you ever have a chance to buy one of these. But again, there's nothing rule of thirds about this. This is just a straight on symmetrical shot. The shot, the concept is the symmetry is what I was going for here. Rule of thirds don't apply. Same thing for this, very straight on shot of the fire station just between, I think, the Hancock Building and Water Tower Place. And I was just going for a straight on shot, but what made it more interesting, and I had to do a little Lightroom work to get it to brighten up this area so you could actually see the officer sitting at his desk in the back office. I thought that was kind of cool. That didn't really show up in the original picture, but I had to do some fiddling around and I was able to get that to work. Finally, this one is truly a matter of taste. This is just a pink vase on a field of white. In the winter, I don't like to go out and trudge around as much as I used to. And so I do more still lifes and so forth. And so I took this picture. I was considering moving the pink vase off to the side like I did with this blue vase, which I took a couple of minutes before. But when I got this picture into my computer, I looked at it and I thought, you know, I kind of like it just sitting in all of the white. All right. Now, it hasn't gotten much love on Flickr. It is done very poorly, but I like it. That's what counts. Another way of dealing with or overruling the rule of thirds is tight crops. For example, this is a hosta bud at Cantigny. What a surprise. There's nothing rule of thirds about this. It's just a really tight crop. The subject is very much the bud, nothing else. That's it. And it's gotten a lot of love on Flickr. This picture doesn't obey any rule of thirds. It's tightly cropped. Tightly cropped means you've brought in all the sides, so the subject really is the only thing in the picture. This picture has been very popular, and it took me a while to figure out why. I'll explain later because I've got this picture coming up in another section. This one is just railroad tracks. But it's tightly cropped and it's been very popular. I posted this thinking, nobody's going to care about this. And this is one of those pictures where I didn't care that much about it. I cared enough about it to post it, but I didn't expect it to do anything. And it turned off to people really liked it. So, okay, great, fine. Leading lines and vanishing points. Now this is an example of leading lines, which we'll talk about. I think that's why it took off. This is an example, another train, of leading lines. The tracks, the train itself, all of these leading lines, okay, draw you into the picture. Remember, that's one of the goals, is to draw the viewer into the picture. Leading lines are up here. For example, just these lines below on the windows are all leading lines drawing you into the picture. It's one of the reasons why railroad photography is popular, is that by the nature of the tracks, you have leading lines a lot. This is my favorite kind of leading line, and that is paths. This is in Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge. About 50 feet to the left of where I'm standing is the Rio Grande River in South Texas. And Spanish moss hanging on the trees. It's just a beautiful picture. I've sold multiple prints of this. But the key thing is that path going through it. And the nice thing about paths is they're often curved, which makes them even more attractive. Curved leading lines are pretty cool. This is in southern Arizona. And there's a path, as you can see, weaves back and forth along with the river. Again, leading lines drawing you into the picture. Now, this one also benefits from just having amazing late afternoon light as well, but we'll talk about light later on. And this is at Mount Rainier National Park, and my previous job had me traveling all over the country, and so I have lots of shots from everywhere. But as you can see, leading line. You also have an added element here. It's always nice sometimes when you're taking a scenic shot to get a person in the shot as well, to give some sense of scale. Just looking at this picture with this guy jogging off up this trail exhausts me. This is not a good picture as far as leading lines go, but it's overwhelmed by some other factors. First of all of the leading lines for this picture lead out of the picture. That's not really something you want. You don't want the leading lines to take you out of the picture, and they do. But you got rule of thirds happening here. By the way, I shot this. This is in Charleston, South Carolina. There's a bridge that crosses the river. I was on the bridge, and that's where I got the picture. But because it's rule of thirds, we have other things in the picture. The city of Charleston in the background, not pretty, but interesting. And so this picture actually it's very colorful. It's very sharp, lots of nice things about it. I sold it to the shipping line for them to use in their calendar one year. So made a little money on that too. Using light. Photography is all about writing with light. And so there are, other than the brightness of the light, there are three characteristics of light that we are concerned about. And that is the direction the light is coming from, the color of the light, and the diffusion of the light. Okay. Now, let's talk about just the direction. This is shooting into the sun. Another very popular picture on Flickr. Flickr gives you the ability of liking pictures just like faving, or you like something on Facebook, you fave it on Flickr, and you can see and Flickr also keeps track of the number of views the picture has had and so forth. So you can really tell what kind of popular response it's gotten. And so this one, very popular. Now, I'm not really big on sunset shots because everybody takes sunset shots. This was from our balcony. We were sitting, we paid a lot for it, but we had a balcony that was right on the water. And this shot just kind of like happened, grabbed the camera, even got these, by the way, just as a little trivia, when you see these rays coming out of the sun in a picture, those are called God rays. We even got God rays in this picture. So direction, as I talked earlier about this picture, which we saw earlier, you've got shadows. The sun was pretty low in the sky, so we had nice shadows, which gives some extra interest to the picture. So direction. This one is interesting. Some of you may recognize this picture. This picture was taken by Ansel Adams way back in the 1930s. It's one of Ansel Adams' most famous pictures. I am a big Ansel Adams fan. The picture behind me on my green screen is my photograph that I took from the place where he took Clearing Winter Storm at Yosemite. And so I love Ansel Adams. He is my guy. And so when we happened to be in Taos, New Mexico. And so we found, almost by accident, the church. I had known it was here, and I figured I didn't want to make my wife chase it around, but as it happens, as we were driving into town, there it was. And so we stopped, and I grabbed my camera, and I took this one. It's not intended to be anything more than an homage to Ansel. And it's much different than Ansel's picture. For example, Ansel had a lot more contrast. The church building itself is different. These things are gone. This hump is grown, and so forth. So they've done things to the church. It's been 70 years. But in any case, it was my homage. What I thought was interesting, though, is the direction of the light. Notice where the shadow line falls here. Notice where the shadow line falls here. That was completely accidental, but I think that's pretty cool. Ansel was smiling on me that day. Ansel had a white sky. It was a sunny day, so he should have had something of interest in this concrete sky, but I would not be surprised if he manipulated this to make this all white so that he could have it show up against the gray of the actual church. So that's Ansel. Another example of directionality of light, this is a shot at the Museum of Science and Industry. Again, light is very directional there, makes it much more interesting. If it was just a shot of two kids standing at an exhibit, it would have been nothing. But as a picture, it makes it much more interesting because the light is highly directional. And then we move on to colors. Warm light and colors in general. most of the books say warm light are reds, oranges, and yellows. I really think oranges and yellows. Red is kind of off in its own category, but oranges and yellows are what I think of as warm light. Going back to our original St. Charles picture, not warm light. This is middle of the day. There was nothing, okay? Light is not terribly interesting from a colors perspective until the sun gets lower in the sky and you start getting that nice orangish hue to the light. And so this was taken later. And as you can see, much more, I think, pretty nice warm light. Fall, this is why people like to take pictures of things in the fall, is that nice warm color, okay? And then this one, you might say, well, Jim, what's warm about this? Well, there are some warm tones in the barn. For example, the light red, almost rusty red around the windows. The red, which isn't, as I said, a warm tone, but the books say it is. The red bow, this was taken just after Christmas. But to me, what's warm is this silo, that nice, rusty, buff, beigey look. I just love that. That's what I think makes this picture. Otherwise, it's a picture of a barn with a wreath on it. But with that silo, I think it becomes a much more successful picture. Another project I have is to photograph buildings that are on the National Register of Historic Places. Whenever we go to Door County, I try to find the ones that I haven't photographed yet. This is one of them in Sister Bay. Not terribly interesting, except that it's symmetrical, which means there's no rule of thirds rules here. Although the door kind of facilitates that a little bit. But mostly it's just a picture of warm tones. This brick and the stone is just perfect. And so it's gotten very popular. I did not expect, this is another one that I did not expect to get any popularity, but it has been very successful on Flickr. Complementary colors. When you look at a color wheel, and if you just search for color wheel on Google or whatever you use, you will find pictures similar to this one. And so the reds, the complementary color is blue. Yellow, it's violet or purple. Greens, pinks, okay? And so complementary colors in the same picture often work very well. Now this is an overcooked picture that I took in my neighborhood of basically the complementary colors of orange and violet, okay? It's what happens when you take the sliders in Lightroom and throw them all the way up against the side, and it's called slamming the sliders. And you just, sometimes it's fun to play with and you get interesting looks. It was much more interesting than just the tree as I took it. That's why this picture that I showed you earlier works, is these warm tones in the details, okay, against the light blue sky and the blue paint. Complementary colors as well as warm colors is what makes this picture. And again, in the fall, complementary colors, you've got the yellows against the blues and so forth. And so complementary colors, fall, that's what it's all about. Then there's the red rule. I looked this up on Google and I couldn't find the rule, but I have heard it for years in a photographic context. And the red rule simply is, if it's red, take a picture of it. And here's the example that best describes this. We were walking around downtown Chicago, and this is on the west side of Chicago River, just north of the train station. And it was kind of cool. They had, obviously it was the weekend, so they weren't really serving lunch. They had everything bundled up. But these umbrellas against all of the relatively colorless landscape really stood out. Again, a lot of popularity. I took this picture basically because I saw the red umbrellas and I thought, it's red, shoot it. So I shot it and it was very successful. Diffused light. When I took this picture, it was a very sunny day, brutally sunny. This was at Williamsburg. And this girl was just sitting in some shade in a garden. I think she was eating some nuts or something like that. I saw her, she didn't see me, and I just started snapping pictures. It's one of our all-time favorite pictures. My wife said, hang this one on the wall, so it's hanging on our wall. I even had a woman who wanted to paint this picture and asked for my permission. I said, yeah, go ahead. And so, but it's a soft picture. Generally speaking, when you're photographing people, you want the light to be soft or diffused. It was a sunny day. The light generally wasn't very soft or wasn't very diffused, but it was where she happened to be sitting. Also, when you're shooting flowers, again, this is at Cantigny, when you're shooting flowers, diffuse light on a cloudy day or in the shade generally will make a much prettier picture because you can get more texture and there's less contrast in the pictures that you take. That's the benefit of shooting without direct light, when you're shooting with soft, diffuse light. When you're shooting with direct light, you get pictures like this. Now, this is a guy who plays at military reenactments, World War II reenactments. He plays George Patton. Kind of looks like George Patton. He really acts like George Patton and so forth. I apologize to this guy for taking his picture. I mean, he's there to have his picture taken, but I felt the need to apologize. But this picture was taken in direct sunlight. There was no shade. This area was dark. I really had to fiddle around with this just to get this light enough that you could even make out any kind of detail at all. But bright sunlight, you get harsh shadows, you get lots of contrast, which you don't want. His cheek area is almost too bright, okay? And so that's a problem when you're photographing people in bright sunlight, why you want to have them in diffused light most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. For example, in this picture, this is at the Bristol Renaissance Fair, this guy is squinting, all right? I don't know what this guy's doing, but the bright sunlight is causing these guys to not take a very nice picture. I took the picture because I liked the pose and it was at Bristol Renaissance Fair. It's not a very successful picture just because, if nothing else, because the light isn't very attractive. This is a picture of flowers with harsh sunlight. And it works. I mean, it turns out the light was I usually go to Cantigny late in the afternoon when the sun is low. So it's low, it's less harsh because there's less light. And so it just works out to be better. This one worked out that the sun was at the right angle. It was coming from that way. Therefore, it lit up this side, didn't do too much damage in terms of contrast along the shadow line. And this part still had enough light that it was still visible. I don't think I remember having to do much with this picture except maybe do a little cropping. So harsh sunlight can work for flowers and it can work for people, but generally speaking, this is the kind of situation where cloudy days are good days. And then there's window light. This is my wife. We took this a few years ago in Door County. We were sitting in a coffee shop and the light was hitting her just right. And so I snapped a picture, and to this day, it remains my most favorite picture of hers. And this is my dad. At the time, this was, looks like this was 9 years ago. Dad was starting to feel like he needed to have some documentation of his life. He hadn't had his picture taken in a long time, so he said, take my picture. So I had him sit down in his favorite chair by the window, got a nice shot of him with the window light. Again, soft light, yes, there are shadows, but notice that the edges of the shadows are not hard. That's what you get with diffuse light, particularly window light. Now, this is a rule that I have come up with all on my own, or at least I've given it a name. The concept has been around for a long time, but I gave it the 3D, 3-layer label. And that is, you can create a three-dimensional look simply by making sure that there are 3 layers to the picture to illustrate. This is Cantigny again. They do vintage baseball games, not this year, obviously, but in years past and hopefully in the future, they do baseball games where the guys play by 1858 rules, which are interesting games to watch. Anyway, foreground is the batter. Middle ground is the pitcher. and the ball. And then the background is the trees and the parking lot in the back, okay? Notice, by the way, I focused, I made it so that the blurred parking lot didn't look like a parking lot. That could just as easily have been a lake or a pond or something like that. But this is the picture that I love, because this one, I think, illustrates the best about walking into the picture, stepping over the edge right here and walking into the picture, and of course, falling into the river. You've got the kayakers, who are clearly the foreground. You've got this bridge, which is the middle ground, and then you've got everything else in the city in the background. Very 3D, three-dimensional look to this. And so remember, foreground, middle ground, background. Also change your position, change your point of view. Look up, look down, get lower, get higher. For example, when you're taking photographs of kids, this is actually more of a mistake, is don't take a picture from your point of view. Take a picture from their point of view. It's a much more interesting picture. Now, by the way, this is a centered picture. I was just happy to get a picture of the kid. I didn't really think about the composition, but if I had, I would have probably cut off this point. Notice this is not straight up and down. If you don't have a horizon in the picture, you look for verticals. And so there's all kinds of problems with this picture, but it's a picture of my nephew. Yay. I got down and dirty in the dirt, in the snow, in our backyard when these snowdrops came up back in 2009, and I won't ever do that again. But I got a pretty good picture, so I'm happy. But again, for snowdrops, and I see snowdrops every year, and I think, do I want to do that again? No, I don't want to do that again. You got to get really low, okay? Particularly for snowdrops. Or you can just look up. This is Tribune Tower, right from the entrance to Tribune Tower, just looking straight up. This is looking straight down at a goose that was floating in the river along the DuPage River in downtown Naperville. They have these little platforms that stick out over the river. And so he was just below the platform, loafing on the river. And so I shot down, and I think it's an interesting, the curvature of his neck, the warmer colors and so forth. I think it worked pretty well. This picture I actually shot from below. The flower was high enough I could get the camera below it and turn the lens up, and I had a camera where I could rotate the back screen so I could compose and take the picture, and it came out reasonably successfully. Not enough people take pictures of flowers from unexpected angles. And that's certainly something where you can be very creative. Something else, and this is really only if you want to get adventurous with your software, is to try to take a picture where you convert it to black and white or monochrome, depending on how much of a purist you are. Usually you do this if the color isn't as critical as texture, contrast, or the simple form. For example, this is a picture of 3 roses. Now, they form a triangle, which is another compositional trick that is beyond the amount of time we'll have today, but forming a triangle is a nice thing. But when I first processed this, I did it in black and white. Why? I just thought it looked better in black and white, okay? And the black and white, I later posted the color version. The black and white version was more popular than the color version, but which one? It's a matter of taste. This is a situation where you can use black and white to fix problems. Cantigny has yellow and orange chairs that they put out and sprinkle around all over the garden. They are one of Cantigny's most popular ideas for engaging with visitors. People use them all the time for family portraits, for selfies, you name it. And they're not always in the same spot, so you sometimes have to look for them. They move them around. But this particular day, I wanted to get a nice shot of the magnolias blooming around the fountain at Cantigny. The magnolias only bloom spectacular like that for like a week or so. It's a timing issue. And so if you're going to get this shot, you got to get it. And the problem was that orange chair was in the way, and I just didn't like that orange chair. Now, I could have trudged down and moved it out of the way, but I probably would have had to drag it probably 50 or 60 feet to get it completely out of the picture. But black and white solves the problem. Because when you turn things black and white, yeah, the chair is still there, but it's much less annoying than it was in the original picture. The magnolias, they're still white. So, in fact, I think the magnolia trees even look more interesting against the gray sky. So consider black and white as a way of fixing problems as well. And sometimes you can follow the rules, or you can look at pictures and they just don't make any sense to you at all. This is my all-time favorite picture. No other picture I've shown you is more liked by yours truly than this one. I don't know why. There were more interesting pictures that I took. This is a photograph of the side of a mesa in Monument Valley in the Navajo Indian Reservation that straddles Arizona and Utah. If you've ever seen pictures from Monument Valley, trust me, you've never seen a picture of of a side of the mesa. I saw this, I photographed it. I just love it. Okay, I can't say anything more about it. It is my all-time favorite picture. Why? The only thing I can think of is there's a mixture of textures, which is another compositional element. And it's a very warm color. There's lots of things to explore in the picture, maybe. This chunk right here intrigues me. But other than that, it doesn't meet many of the rules. There's no rule of thirds action here. There's no 3D, 3-layer. There's no leading lines. There's no nothing. And so sometimes pictures work just because. Now let's talk about some resources for you. I would recommend, if you want to look at pictures, go to museums. Analyze a picture that makes you think, yeah, that's a pretty good picture. Analyze why you may think it makes a pretty good picture. You can look online, you can look on magazines. They still make print magazines, I think. But what makes the image work for you? And remember, it may not work for you, but it may work for somebody else. And presumably, the artist would not have put it out there unless it worked for him or her. As far as online resources are concerned, the first 5 are essentially online photography magazines. I have no preference, but I've used them all, looked at them all. There's a lot of information about photography that's online, and you can just overload if you wanted to. The last 2 links are to online pictures. The first one is to the Art Institute. They've got their collection online, so use that. And finally, Flickr, if you go to Flickr Explorer, you'll see a lot of pictures. Flickr goes and looks through the pictures that get added and picks out pictures that they think, through a very, very weird algorithm that nobody really understands, they show pictures in their Explore galleries, which is great. I just had one made Explore. I don't get many making Explore over the years, but it doesn't necessarily give you high quality pictures. This picture that I took several years ago made Explore, and I cannot figure out why. It just did. It's a nice picture of a group of photographers, but there's nothing special about this, but it made Explore. So to recap, we talked about common mistakes you're making. We talked about the rules of composition, things that you can do to improve your picture. Using the rule of thirds, using leading lines, using light to make the picture more interesting, changing your point of view, and trying to convert to black and white. There's a lot more rules of composition out there. If you're interested, just Google rules of composition and you'll see lots of articles on that topic as well. And with that, I'm late, but that brings us to the end.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim. That was a wonderful, wonderful wealth of information. While we give people a chance to think things over and add in some questions, I was just wondering, when you're out taking pictures and you happen to include a person in your picture, how do you go about asking them for permission?
You technically do not need to ask a person for permission if you are only going to use the picture in a non-commercial way, which means in a non-advertising way. Say, for example, if you took, well, it's not you guys. If I took a picture of, and I have done this, it's of somebody at Cantigny, and I would go up to them afterwards and say, can you give me your email address so that I can send your picture, because I give all the pictures I take that I like to Cantigny. And so I would then give the picture to Cantigny and say, this is their contact information. If you want to use it in your promotional materials, then you should be contacting them because it's promotional. But if I just want to use it for instructional purposes or to post on Flickr, you don't really need anybody's permission. I don't like to do that if it's anything more than, if it's a flattering shot, it's no big deal. The one exception to that rule is if you essentially mock the person or treat them badly in some way, then you could get in trouble. But if you're just posting it in an editorial sense, you don't need to worry about that.
Okay, great, great. And just a reminder, if you'd like to ask Jim a question, the Q&A button is usually along the bottom edge of your screen, and it just toggles open, and you can go ahead and put questions in the Q&A. Jim, as we go into the fall, do you have any particular tips as we're looking at perhaps fall foliage or the lighting that may be different in the fall?
Well, the nice thing about fall is that as the sun gets lower, the light is warmer and you have longer shadows more of the day. And so fall is nice for that, just from the lighting perspective. Obviously, parks, Cantigny, the Arboretum are all good places for fall color. It's a question of, it's where you find it and what you want to photograph. Fall color, to me, fall color, just taking a picture of trees turning brown or something doesn't, to me, it has no interest. I posted a picture of, I did a lot of work last year in photographing a building at Cantigny that's called the Dairyman's Cottage. And it's one of the original cottages from when Robert McCormick had his estate there, and he had a dairy, and the dairyman was there, and he lived there and he took care of the dairy. And so it's called the Dairyman's Cottage, but it's really a guest house for visitors and so forth. And, but I was there, happened to notice that the fall color at this particular spot had some promise. It wasn't at peak yet. So I went back like 5 or 6 times to photograph this building and spent a lot of time on this picture. It worked for me, but it didn't get any love on Flickr. It was very disappointing, but that's okay. I enjoyed it. I liked making it. The process of making the picture is what I enjoy. The fact that people didn't like it on Flickr, you win some, you lose some. So as I said, you're making the picture not only for other people, you're making the picture for you. And so if it isn't popular, if it doesn't get a lot of likes on Facebook, not the end of the world. So it's nice to get it, but otherwise you made a picture for you that you like. That's the important thing.
Right, thank you. All right, there's a question here. Do you have any tips for indoor flash photos?
Experiment and be prepared for disappointment. I have over the years tried to learn and use flash. It's one of the reasons why I do still lifes during the winter, is that I've got reasonable amount of money invested in flash equipment. And so I enjoy doing that kind of thing, and I like to play with it, and I like to buy more stuff. And so still life, but the most important thing to remember is if you're photographing people, it's got to be soft light. And so you need to buy diffusers for your lights that make that light softer, because if you just, for example, use the flash that's on your camera and take a picture with that flash that pops up, takes the picture, it's going to be really, really not good. It will be a great picture as far as a documentation of that person, but it's not going to be a good picture. And so there are a lot of things you can do. There's a site called, and I'll just Google it, it's Strobist, Strobist. It was started by a laid off photographer for a newspaper in Maryland. And he decided to start writing a blog about Flash because he used it all the time. And it has really become the destination for learning about how to use Flash. He's got tutorials and so forth. And so if you wanted to learn more about it, you were willing to invest some time in just reading a blog, then it's very, very educational. And so that would be the best advice I can give, is think soft light. In other words, that diffused light, and try to learn more about it via Strobist.
Great, great. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Jim.
You're welcome.
What a tremendous wealth of information. I think we'll all be going out and taking better pictures.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so. And again, please email me if you have any questions.
Right. And I was going to mention this program has been recorded and it will be uploaded to the library's YouTube page for you to view again or to suggest to a friend for more information. I'll also be sending out links to various websites and connection points, links to contact Jim in an email to those that have registered for the program. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Take care, everybody. Stay healthy, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.